Hello, I'm Jackie Flavin, Customer Insights Leader with Demco, and this is Open Book, our weekly conversation series with industry experts about how they're navigating COVID-19 challenges. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by Tinashe Blanchet. Tinashe started a learning laboratory in New Orleans about 6 years ago to give kids non-traditional learning opportunities. The work they're doing is really awesome. It's known as a place where school ends and learning begins. And she also coaches and consults schools and educators around the country, helping them integrate technology and innovate their curriculum. She's a Google certified innovator and trainer, does a lot of really great TED Talks and speeches. I saw she's one of the 40 under 40 in New Orleans. And she also taught math for 15 years. And I love this. She doesn't let students say that I'm not, she doesn't let her students say I'm not a math person. So we are so lucky, so honored to have you here to share your experience with us today. Your learning laboratory decided to go virtual early on in the summer. And so maybe a good starting point would just be to ask, could you tell us a little bit about the Learning Lab? Like how are you giving students these unforgettable learning experiences? And just tell us about the awesome work that you're doing there.
Thank you for that great introduction, first of all. So again, I'm Tinashe Blanchet, and I started the Learning Laboratory, as you mentioned, about 6 years ago. And we are a nonprofit organization based in New Orleans, and we're committed to offering high quality, low cost programs for K-12 students, as well as adult learners in the greater New Orleans area. For us, it's really important to be innovative, to get anyone who participates in our programs to be really excited about learning. I started the lab back in 2014 in hopes of creating a community classroom for learners of all ages. And although I consider myself to be the lead educator at the lab, I call myself the lead learner because I want, just like all of the people who attend the lab programs, I want to be primarily driven by a love of learning. And so I try to communicate that even in what I call myself. So that's basically what we're about here at the lab, is just creating programs that are really innovative and exciting and just get people really into learning. And so Genius Camp, which is the program that you mentioned that we had to go virtual with this summer, is an example of that type of program.
So awesome. And so as everything was shutting down and school districts were struggling to figure out how to do virtual learning, you made that tough decision in about early to mid-June to go virtual. That must have been really hard. And I know it was sort of in opposition to what you were being asked to do in New Orleans, right? I mean, tell us about what that was like and how you were able to take everything virtual.
Well, I mean, it wasn't an easy decision to make because in year 6 of our program, we had really kind of hit our stride. I was at a point where I really felt very comfortable with the way we were doing things with our summer program. And so, I was just looking forward to another successful year. So when COVID came along in March, that was a time where, we really started to realize that this was going to have a serious impact on our programs. It was just a really difficult decision to make. And so, when we started to get into late May, which is a time where usually we're solidifying the final details of our camp, we were still very much in limbo in terms of whether we were going to do camp in person or virtually or some combination of both. And then the city of New Orleans actually they had a call with the mayor where they talked about what the city's plans were for their summer camps. And, living in New Orleans, I'm accustomed to having to make changes. We get a lot of, tropical weather in the summer. So there have been many times where I've had to cancel camp, temporarily because of a tropical storm or a hurricane. And typically we follow the city's lead in terms of what they do. And that's usually what we do. So if the city cancels their camps, then we usually cancel ours. But this summer, the city decided to go ahead and proceed with offering their summer camps in person, with all of those requirements that, like social distancing and wearing masks and, quarantining if you end up with COVID. And, with all of that, and then also just speaking to our parents and, their concerns, we just decided in an abundance of caution to just go completely virtual because, one of the requirements from the city was that if we did have someone, who ends up testing positive, then we would have to shut the camp down for 2 weeks. It's only a 4-week camp. So for us, that just was not really feasible. And so we just decided to go ahead and go 100% virtual.
Yeah, and your camp is so hands-on, so engaging, and it's everything that I've seen. It seems like it's about being together and just sort of being present. So how do you take that virtual?
Well, I mean, it was definitely a challenge to say the least. And one thing that we definitely had to do was to consider what we could continue to do and what we may not be able to do, right? So obviously, the virtual version of Genius Camp was not the same as Genius Camp in person, right? So for example, Genius Camp is a 4-week STEM camp. We usually take on some really ambitious STEM theme like last year it was biomedical engineering, and so the kids did things like built prosthetics and met a prosthetist at the children's hospital, and did a model of angioplasty, which is clearing a blockage in a vein. And so this is some really heavy duty hands-on science, right? And so it's kind of difficult to do that in a remote environment, so we had to kind of scale back on what we expected campus to do asynchronously and independently in their homes. And so instead of taking on an ambitious STEM theme for the whole summer, what we did is set weekly STEM themes. And another thing that we did, usually we have a partner in Pensacola, Florida, the Pensacola Mess Hall, and MESS stands for Math, Engineering, Science, and Stuff. So usually one of the highlights of our campus, we take a trip to Florida and we visit the mess hall. And so, this summer we were unable to do that. So instead we partnered with the Pensacola Mess Hall, and they had already designed some virtual field trips where it was basically hands-on science activities. So we provided the campers, or I should say they provided us with a list that we were able to pass on to our campers. So every week they would gather materials so that when we had our Zoom call on Friday, they would have their virtual field trip where they gather all their materials and they could do these hands-on activities and experiments with the staff at the mess halls. So that was one really cool way that we were able to continue to maintain that hands-on kind of STEMmy feel that Genius Camp is known for.
That's so awesome. Good for you guys. As you were talking, I was like, I just want to be a kid again and go through that kind of stuff. That sounds like just such awesome experiences for your kids. And I'm so glad that they were still able to get that, even though, we've got a pandemic going on. I'm wondering, so you work with schools everywhere all across the country, helping them, innovate and integrate technology and all these awesome things. So your experience is so useful to everyone now as we're trying to figure out how to make this work, longer term. I'm wondering what kind of like big aha light bulb moments came to you during this whole experience that, would be good to share with everyone who's trying to figure out this puzzle right now.
Well, believe it or not, my light bulb moment, I would say the aha that I had in the midst of this time actually didn't come from my camp. It didn't come from the teachers that I worked with. It came from my own childhood. And just thinking about, what would this be like if I were, say, 10 years old, right? I was a foster child and actually landed in foster care because I fled an abusive home. And so I know firsthand how difficult it is, this idea of not being able to be in school. And I was just thinking about, what it would have been like for me if school would have been canceled for several months, leaving me at home with a volatile parent, right? And so, also thinking about how many kids today must be in that same environment, must be in that same situation. So personally, I'm a single mom of 3. I have one in college, I have one in high school, and one in middle school. And I'm really thankful, that I enjoy having my kids at home and I'm able to provide a stable, loving home for them during this time. But I understand that that's not necessarily the case with a lot of children. And I think that as educators, we have to recognize whether we're at school or in my case, doing a non-traditional or extracurricular environment, we play a huge role in the lives of the children and teens that we work with. And so a lot of times we're the caring adult that they're relying on, right? And so we have to think about that predictability and stability that we've provided for our students. And with school as we know it just at a complete standstill, many of our students are in homes that aren't even necessarily abusive, but it could just be that their parents are so preoccupied with maintaining this household now, right? With work, with maybe they have other children that they have to take care of. Maybe you have babies that need to be, taken care of, or just coping with COVID, coping with everything that's happening in the world right now. You have families that are dealing with health issues or dealing with unemployment and just the mental stress of everything. So I think, we really have to take into account that educators play such an important part in our culture and in our society. Um, Especially when you do have kids who are in abusive or neglectful homes, being away from school for them can just be downright dangerous, right? So I think that those personal relationships, in terms of what I realize, is just how important interpersonal relationships are, regardless of what kind of educational work you're doing. Another example of this will be Genius Camp. With Genius Camp, as I mentioned earlier, we were not able to offer the same experience or even the same level of activity that we would if we were in person. But it was so nice to see those campers and those families come in and really just talk about wanting to maintain a connection, right? So there were just a lot of moments that we had in Genius Camp where you could tell it wasn't really about the content. It was about just the fact that they could see me, they could see the volunteers, they could see each other and have that sense of, okay, so this is like last summer. This is like the summer before last, because we had a lot of folks who, families and campers who had been with us, for years. And so it really was important to them to maintain that connection. One more thing I'll say about this is, as an educational consultant, and you mentioning with me working with teachers, and needless to say, I've been pretty busy these days, right? And so over the past couple of weeks, I've asked over 1,000 teachers, what their priorities are during this unprecedented time. And many of them express the need to connect with their students, not in an academic way, but in the word that they usually use is SEL, or social emotional learning, right? So I even had teachers who said, a lot of them who were like, I wouldn't even try to teach content if I knew that I had a limited time with my students, right? And so just understanding, how important teachers are in the lives of children, in the lives of families, and it goes way beyond being a content expert, right? How can we maintain a more personal connection with our students? And I think that that's something that has really come to the forefront for me as an educator. Not that I didn't know this pre-COVID, right? But it definitely has become, much more centered during this time where everyone kind of feels so, unstable.
Yeah. Educators have always been superheroes in my mind, and I feel like now people are understanding that, like, outside of the education industry, right? So like parents really understand the value of school and the roles that their educators play in their children's lives, and I think we see that so clearly now. So I'm hoping that we can remember that when things start to go back to quote unquote normal. And I love the focus on social emotional support. I feel like so many of the educators that we've been talking to have kind of been like, they'll learn math and history later. Like, we need to support them, as people right now going through a challenging time. And that's so awesome. Like, I mean, I hate that it took this terrible crisis for us to get there, but that is really awesome that is a priority now.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. Yeah, you must be so busy helping school districts figure all this out, and you really are like in such a wonderful, all your experience and what you're doing with the Learning Lab. You really are such a wonderful expert for schools to tap on now. And I'm so glad that you're coming to Minneapolis Public, or you're virtually going to be helping Minneapolis Public Schools, because that's where my kids are. So thank you. Let's see. I'm wondering. So we've kind of covered a little bit of this, but if you're an educator about to you said spring didn't go very well, and you're going to be doing a virtual learning over the fall, are there any other bits of advice that you could give them, things that you learned, like secrets to make it work, basically?
Well, I mean, I guess one thing I'll say is that I'm really thankful that I'm in the position that I'm in right now, because I do have the skills and experience to kind of help teachers navigate, the new expectations of this time. As you mentioned earlier, I am a Google certified innovator and trainer. And pre-COVID, I traveled around the country and I trained, hundreds of teachers on how to use technology tools like Google Classroom to enhance their instruction. Needless to say, my skills are in really high demand right now as districts and schools around the country and the world really go completely virtual or blended with their instruction. And, as a former high school math teacher, I don't envy, I do not envy these teachers who have to try to figure out how to adapt their instruction to all of these new requirements and demands. So I'm happy to help, but I have to honestly say I'm happy not to be on the front line. I can't stress enough right now how difficult it is to be a teacher right now. And so I think it's really important. If I could say something, for anyone to hear, I would say to parents, to communities, to government leaders, to please take into account how difficult this is for teachers with every decision that you make, decisions that affect schools, decisions that affect teachers, that affect, students. We really have to be mindful of the fact that teachers are now those frontline folks who are putting their lives on the line in many cases to actually re-enter the classroom. Even, I think I saw a case in Arizona where you had teachers who were not working with students. It was just the teachers who were going into their classrooms using, their computers and their resources that they had in their physical classrooms. And they still had, they ended up catching COVID just from each other. And so the fact that teachers are entering schools and entering classrooms, it just goes to show, how committed they are. And so we owe it to teachers and of course to the students that they work with to be really kind of slow to act right now and really make sure that the decisions that we're making are in the best interest, not just academically, but again, from that SEL standpoint. And of course, the top priority needs to be making a decision that's going to preserve the safety and the health of everyone.
Yeah, well said. Okay, I'm wondering, there's been so many, the pandemic has upended so many things, and we've had so many challenges, but there have been some ways that the pandemic has had a positive impact, and some of them we've touched on. I'm wondering, and it might be something that you've already sort of touched on, but where do you see like a bright spot or a silver lining for you, your students, the educators you work with, the broader community? Like there is, where do you see like the biggest bright spot in all of this?
Well, teachers are being asked to deliver instruction online, right? They're being asked to assess students in more authentic and challenging ways because you can't get away with fill in the blank or bubble in the answer when kids are at home, right? And we're also being asked to connect with students and families in ways to not only provide that academic support, as I already mentioned, but also to be a social and emotional advocate for children and their parents. And none of these ideas can be labeled as like post-COVID, right? So I think that the bright spot in all of this is that a lot of things that teachers are being required to do now are things that were already, a great option pre-COVID, right? Technology's been in our toolkit as educators for decades now, right? Our students are living in a tech-driven world. Effective educators have to use technology within their instruction if they're going to prepare their students for, the world of work or, just going to college, right? As a teacher, I think about what is it that my students would do after they leave me that wouldn't require them to get on a computer. So this idea that it's okay for us to do, sit and get instruction or, something that doesn't really prepare students for a modern world has been antiquated long before, coronavirus. So what I consider to be the, bright spot in all of this is that hopefully teachers understand that, this new urgency that we have to teach differently shouldn't end once we get a vaccine. Right? All of these new ways that we're learning how to teach, all these lessons that we're getting about innovating and learning about new methods and tools to reach our students. I hope that they're going to survive after this time to enhance our instruction after, COVID is no longer the big thing, right? When our students return to our physical classrooms, I hope that we're not going to return to our old ways of teaching. this is an opportunity for us to make this shift that we've been being asked to make for a really long time now. And so I'm just hoping that we can kind of have a paradigm shift in terms of how education is delivered to students, and that, you know, the changes that we make will create a more equitable system for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a great note to end on. And this is exactly why we started the webcast, to share these like really awesome, energizing messages. So thank you for being our guest today. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.